Let's get into the issues of the day with the panel. Joining us from Melbourne from the Institute of Public Affairs is Daniel Wild, and in Brisbane, the national political editor of the Courier Mail, Renee Villaris, joins us. Renee, let's start with you. The Nationals tearing themselves apart at the moment. Last week it was all over who's getting credit for drought policy. Today they're back onto the dairy code of conduct. David Gillespie, ridiculously not ruling out a tilt against Deputy Leader Bridget McKenzie. A lot of this is driven by frustration from the Nationals, isn't it? That they think Pauline Hanson and One Nation are getting all the credit for a lot of these regional issues, especially when it comes to the drought.
Yeah, but I also think it's a symptom of Michael McCormack's leadership. Just a bit of history. A few weeks ago, Pauline Hanson came out and said that she would not be voting for any non-government critical bills unless there was a re-regulation of the dairy industry. Bridget McKenzie provided some quotes for that story saying, well, we can't bring that forward any further than April. She then went and told the party room 2 days later that she could not bring forward that dairy code of conduct any further than April. 2 days later, she writes a letter to Pauline Hanson saying it'll be brought forward to December, and then all hell has broken loose. And that's where you've seen the fallout. That's just been, it's been a hemorrhage for weeks now, and I think that's what sparked, Lou O'Brien, the Wide Bay MP, to stand up and say, I intended to call a spill today, but Bridget's not here. She's in estimates. So it hasn't healed itself since then, and there's been obviously the undercurrent of that is also drought, and this feeling of frustration that they can't get their leader to walk into the Prime Minister's office and say, hey, we want this for our communities on drought. It's being led by the Prime Minister, and probably, as it should be, it's a crucial issue. But usually when you make big announcements on drought as a Prime Minister, you have your Deputy Prime Minister standing right next to you. We haven't seen much of that.
Yeah, it's pretty ugly stuff, Daniel, and I think Renee's right in that it obviously reflects on the lack of cut-through public authority and perhaps even internal authority in the government of the Nationals leader, Michael McCormack.
I think that's right, Chris, and it also gets to a broader issue of what is the actual policy vision that they have for not just getting through the drought that we have now and not just getting through some issues that dairy farmers are facing now, but for the future of agriculture and the future of the Australian economy. If we want to look at dams and why dams aren't being built, as an example, we need to look at environmental law, we need to look at the over-regulation. We had some research that came out earlier this week, Chris, that showed there's been an 80-fold increase in environmental legislation since 1971 when the first Commonwealth Environment Department was established. That's on top of all of the state-based legislation that is on the books as well. So governments need to be looking at how to reduce the regulatory burden on our agricultural sector, whether it's on dairy farmers, whether it's on people trying to build dams, whether it's on other infrastructure. At the moment, what we really have is just a hodgepodge of different ideas where governments are responding to issues as they come up, and they're lacking a very broad-based, coherent vision of how to generate prosperity in the agricultural sector. Well,
apart from getting a fair price at the farm gate, the one way you could help dairy farmers is get power costs down. Huge power bills, and they've been screwed over royally when it comes to those. But Renee, as you've written today, Pauline Hanson is still pushing ahead on the drought response, and she's attacking Scott Morrison. She doesn't think that Scott Morrison's doing enough. Now, it's very easy for her from the crossbenchers to make that sort of claim. Scott Morrison's got to actually find the money and the right programs and deliver, but it's pretty spirited stuff.
Yeah, she's attacked him quite personally, actually, by claiming that his lousy response, her word, was contributing to farmers taking their own lives. Now, that's quite emotive, but I mean, yes, you're right. Pauline Hanson can always sit on the sidelines and make demands, and this is part of the Nats problem too, because when the Nats go back to their communities and people raise One Nation, they say to them, well, hang on a minute, she's not in government and she can't get outcomes. So when she does get outcomes, not only does it embolden her, but it also deflates the National Party. So this issue that she's today on her attacks with Scott Morrison, it's as much about politics as also about Pauline Hanson, though, deep down wanting to do what's right for farmers, what she thinks is right for farmers. So, Pauline Hanson is obviously in competition with the Nats and many seats, especially in Queensland. And I think she's seen that there's some blood in the water, and she's a smart politician. People who don't take her seriously, haven't been watching for 20 years.
Yeah, Daniel, I think one of the problems for the Nats, though, is they do have some strong media performers. They do have some people who cut through. And some of them are from Pauline Hanson country. I'm thinking of Matt Canavan, who's always willing to have a crack. Obviously, Barnaby Joyce. Now, Matt Canavan's got a senior cabinet portfolio, but Barnaby Joyce is not even on the front bench. So you've got those Nats voices, but they're not the leadership of the party. The leadership is almost invisible at times.
Yeah, it is, Chris, and as important as those personalities are, I think the main division here really comes down to policy. If you look at what Senator Canavan and Barnaby Joyce are promoting, they're looking at, for example, wanting to get rid of the ban on nuclear power, wanting to reduce regulation, have more decentralisation, pushing out powers to the regions and to the states, and getting power away from city-based bureaucrats. And
they want coal-fired power too.
And they want coal-fired power and not ongoing subsidies. Like we've got $1 billion subsidy, an extra $1 billion subsidy going to the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, which is just a massive exercise in crony capitalism that's not going to do anything to get power prices down. So yes, it's the personalities, but it's also the policies that they're pushing. And I think the leadership of both the Nationals and the Liberals took on more of these policies that Senator Canavan and Barnaby Joyce are talking about. A lot of these divisions would probably fall away.
Yeah, I think you're right. Just crack on and get a few things done in this space. On the other side of politics, Renee, sort of every cockatoo and every pet shop in the country has got a plan for how to revive Labor's fortunes. Claire O'Neill, the latest to say that they're too politically correct, too much focus on identity politics. I mean, it's so easy, isn't it? It's so obvious what happened with Labor. It was obvious in the lead up to the election that they'd gone with a really radical left agenda. They just need to get back to mainstream values, but it's no good talking about it. They've actually got to adopt some policy positions and demonstrate that they've learned the lessons of the election.
Yeah, I don't understand why it took an election loss for them to realise that they were a little bit out of touch, especially with their base, those working class blue collar people who used to be their base. I know that from speaking to a few Labor MPs who've come up to Queensland recently, people in central Queensland have turned their back on them, saying, I wanted to vote for you, but I just couldn't do it because you turned away from us. I think Anthony Albanese's strategy is, look, there's a lot of people in Labor who are still really mourning the election loss, and he wants everyone to it's cathartic, get everything off your chest, and come February we press the button and we go hell for leather. And I think that's why he's allowing a lot of people to speak and speak honestly. But what I don't understand is why we had so much groupthink from the Labor Party ahead of the last election. Why didn't anyone stand up and say, hang on, this doesn't seem right? Why did they not see this coming? Because you have a conversation with a normal person outside a city and they'd tell you that.
Yeah, Daniel, it was so obvious, and this is why even way back at the second half of last year, after the leadership turmoil, when the polls tanked for the coalition, even then I was saying that there was still a chance to win the election because Labor's extreme agenda always played them into it. Now, Scott Morrison pulled things together brilliantly and campaigned brilliantly, but what kept the coalition in it after all their leadership turmoil was the extreme high tax and green energy agenda of the Labor Party, and it's astonishing they couldn't see that, and some of them can't even see that now.
Yeah, that's right. It was the high tax and climate policies, Chris, and it was also the out-of-touch element of Labor and what that represented. As exemplified in Bob Brown driving up to Queensland to tell Central Queenslanders you can't have a job at Adani. So that was the kind of out of touch elite nature that was behind a lot of those policies. This idea that government knows better, that Canberra knows better than what people know for themselves. But the other point to make is Claire O'Neill is right in what she's saying. But welcome to 10 years ago. Claire, the inner city elites have been talking down to mainstream Australians for years and years and years, and it's surprising they're only just realising that now there's 80% of the population that doesn't feel represented by the 20% inner core that resides in our inner suburbs, who want to impose higher taxes, unrealistic, uneconomic climate policies. And then you've also, of course, got political correctness, which seeks to shut down debate, shut down speech when they're talking about immigration, when they're talking about climate policies. So the issue here, as you say, is talk is cheap. What are they actually going to do on policy? And I think that they're very stuck. They're stuck between having this identity politics, climate change, mass migration, political correctness type policy setup, which panders to the inner city elites, and on the other hand having a policy agenda that suits the suburbs and the outer suburbs and the regions. I don't think Labor can get out of this, because the Greens are always hot on their heels. If Labor moves anywhere to the centre, the Greens are going to take the inner city seats. So I think they're going to be stuck at least until the next election, Chris.
Yeah, no, let them do it, I say. Let them make that argument. They can't destroy themselves by trying to protect Green votes, but we'll see. Just briefly, Renee, Twitter saying they're not going to take any political advertising from now. I can't believe that anyone would spend money with political advertising on Twitter anyway. I mean, it's just a sort of a green left echo chamber. So maybe they'd be best just to keep politics off Twitter.
Yes, but Twitter is not for the real person, is it?
It's not
How many times,
at all.
Chris, have you dropped your kids how many times have you ran into a normal person and they've said, have you seen the latest tweet by blah? I mean, when I take my kids to school, I've never had a mother or a father say that to me, or a teacher. That Twitter is an echo chamber for those who are engaged in the political process. And I don't... How much money did Twitter actually raise from political advertising? I'd be surprised if it was that much.
Yeah.
Because, all it is confirmation bias. And I think, well, good on them for making a statement, but we'll see how long it takes, whether it encourages others like Facebook to do the same thing.
Yeah, indeed. Thanks so much for joining us, Renee. I think Twitter, like sending kids down coal mines, it's something that we should just get rid of. Just stop doing it. Ban Twitter. I don't think it's been very good for society at all. Thanks for joining us, Renee Valaris and Daniel Wild. We better take a break. On the other side of the break, catching up with Adam Crichton, having a look at economic issues as well, also talking about nuclear